Learning how to write a poem is debatably one of the hardest forms of creative writing to master. There are so many rules to it, but at the same time, there are no rules at all. It is the ultimate form of individual expression. However, there are specific creative writing prompts. Confusing, right? Yes, of course. Despite the challenge, writing poetry is a very fulfilling creative venture. And we have exactly what you are looking for to learn how to nail this art form. Because poetry is so specific to the artist, knowing how to write a poem in your own way can be tricky. And in this video, you will learn the fundamentals for writing meaningful poetry. Continue watching and remember to subscribe to hqwords TV. What else? Welcome on board once again. The basics for how to write a poem. Here we go. Poetry can often be subjective. Not every poem will speak for every person the same way. That being said, there are different attributes that you should learn if you want to know how to write poetry well, regardless of anything. Basic 1. Structure of writing a poem. The structure of a poem can refer to many different things, but we are going to discuss some different forms of poetry, how to use punctuation, and last words. Form of a poem. The form of a poem is the physical structure of a poem. It can have requirements for rhyme, line length, number of lines, and number of stanzas. Here are different types of poetry forms. Sonnet, a short rhyming poem of 14 lines. Haiku, a poem of 3 lines where the first is 5 syllables, the middle is 7 syllables, and the last is 5 syllables. Acrostic, a poem where the first letter of each line spells a word that fits with the theme of the poem or exposes a deeper meaning. Limerick, this is a 5-line witty poem with the first, second, and fifth lines rhyming as do the other 2 with each other. Epic. This type of poetry is a lengthy narrative poem celebrating adventures or accomplishments of heroes. Couplet. This can be a part of a poem or stand alone as a poem of 2 lines that rhyme. Free verse. This type of poem doesn't follow any rules and is free written poetry by the author. The majority of poets, especially less experienced ones, write what is called the free verse, which is a poem without a form, or with a form the poet has made up for that specific piece. A poet may decide to have a certain rhyme scheme or might make their poems syllabic. With a free verse poem, you can set up any theme or pattern you wish, or have none at all. The great thing about poetry is that you can even start with a specific poem form and then choose to alter it in order to make it unique and special. Poetry punctuation. Writing a poem is difficult because you never know what the appropriate punctuation is, because it can be different from punctuation when writing a book. There are essentially 3 ways to punctuate your poetry. First, grammatically. This means you use punctuation properly for every grammar rule. If you remove the lines and stanzas, it will work as a grammatically correct paragraph. And this even includes writing dialogue in your poem. Stylistically, this means you use punctuation to serve the way you would like the poem to be read. A comma indicates a short pause, a period or full stop indicates a longer pause. A dash indicates a pause with a concentration of thought. Using no punctuation at all will lend to a rush feeling which you may want. Your punctuation choices will depend on your goals when writing a poem. A combination. Maybe you want to mostly follow the punctuation rules, but you have a certain line you want to read a certain way. It is totally fine to deviate from standard rules if it serves a purpose. You just need to do whatever you are doing intentionally. Know the rules before you can break them. In poetry, punctuation serves as a conductor. It sets the beat of a line or a stanza, telling you where to pause for breath. Conversely, a jamment that is running lines of poetry together by not ending them with punctuation can be extremely powerful when used correctly. It keeps the line flowing without a pause or full stop, according to Crystal Blesdine. Last words of a poem. The last word of a line, the last word of your poem, and the last line of your poem are very important. These are the beats that echo in your reader's head and have the most emphasis. Ending with punctuation like dash, period, comma, versus ending without punctuation will give you a dramatically different read. So, consider the effect you would like to have. Basic 2. Imagery. Imagery is a literary device that is a tangible description that appeals to one of the five senses. The more imagery in a poem, the more the reader can connect with it. Tips for imagery. Focus on details. Instead of going for the obvious description, really put yourself in that moment or feeling. What details are the most important and real? Here are some of examples of imagery in poetry. Pungent fumes lifted from the floor beneath her. Burning light painted the inside of his eyelids red. Hair from her ponytail beat at her face, swept into a frenzy by the furious winds. Crackling pop in rhythm to the dancing flames. Basic 3. Sound. While imagery is for the mind, sound is for the ear. How do your words and lines sound when read out aloud? The most basic sound style is a rhyme. However, you should never force a rhyme in your poem. If you try for exact rhymes on every line, it becomes sing-songy. And this is a big red mark of an amateur poet. Sticking to a strict rhyme scheme can severely limit your word choice and creativity. Instead of going for exact end rhymes, here are some options to achieve that appealing auditory effect of rhyming when writing poems. Number 1. Assonance. The repetition of a vowel sound in non-rhyming stressed syllables. Assonance gives you the fun sound effect of a rhyme without sounding campy. An example of assonance is Hear the Mellow Wedding Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. Alliteration. The repetition of a consonant at the beginning of words. Specifically, hard consonant sounds like T, ST, and CH have a hard staccato effect that a lot of poets like to use for alliteration. Internal rhymes. Words inside of lines rhyme, rather than the end words. Like assonance, you get the effect of a rhyme. Tip for sound in poetry. Focus on beautiful, crispy imagery to carry your poem, rather than strictly relying on the sound and structure of it. Basic 4. Meaning. Structure, imagery, and sound work together to make up the technical excellence of a poem. But if your words are empty of a deeper meaning, what is the point in writing a poem at all? Poetry is a form of storytelling. The key to writing is making the audience feel. Give them something to remember and hold onto. Brooks Washington. Many new writers latch onto cliches and tired topics like the plantain planter planted plantain in his plantain plantation for their poems, because they think That is what they are supposed to do. However, emulating something someone else has done or some idea of what you should think a poem should be about isn't going to give you a genuine, emotional piece that other people can connect to. So, write a poem that only you can write. Here are our tips for how to write a poem with meaning. Brainstorm poetry topics by looking at your own experiences. What do you know? When is the time you felt very deeply about something? Can you put that feeling into words? Can you make that feeling an image other people can see through your words? That is the poem you write. You don't need some grand, dramatic emotion to write about. Think about the ordinary things that make us all human. Nothing ever ends poetically. It ends and we turn it into poetry. All that blood was never once beautiful. It was just red. Kite Prokowski. Basic 5. Have a goal. Have a goal with writing a poem. That is, what do you want your audience to feel? Are you just writing for fun or for yourself? Poetry is often a very personal form of writing, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't think about your audience at the same time. If you want to publish your poetry eventually, there are a few things to think about in terms of your goals. What emotion or moral do you want to convey? What are you trying to express? These are important questions to answer in order to write an impactful and memorable poem. Basic 6. Avoid cliché phrases when writing poetry. There are so many cliches you want to avoid when writing poetry. Nothing really marks an amateur poet like cliches and false rhymes like we mentioned before. Despite the temptation, avoid cliché phrases. Go line by line and make your language as crisp and original as you can. If there are pieces in your poem that seem you have read or heard them before, try to reword it in order to make it more original. Basic 7. Opt for minimalism. Err on the side of minimalism. Once you have a draft, cut it back to the bare, raw necessaries. Every word should be heavy with emotion and meaning, and every word should be absolutely essential. If your poem seems long-winded to you, imagine what that will be like to your reader. Be ready to edit your poem to get it down to the best form. Poetry is just word math. Every piece has means something, and there can't be any extraneous beats, otherwise it gets confusing. It just becomes a puzzle made out of all the words that make you feel something. Abigail Girio. Basic 8. Refine your poem. The real magic of poetry happens in the revising and refining. Revise the ever-living heck out of it. To paraphrase an old professor of mine, don't be afraid to sit with it for weeks, months, years, as long as the poem needs. It is great to have writing goal and timelines, but don't rush a poem before you know it's ready. Avoid abstractions. An abstraction is a word that can only refer to a concept or feeling. It is not a concrete or tangible thing. Some examples of these are liberty, love, bondage, and aggression. Abstraction makes every person picture something different. So, there are weak words and they will weaken your poem. Instead of using an abstraction, think of what imagery you can use to convey that emotion or concept. Liberty can become chains breaking or birds flying. Love can be bringing your spouse coffee in bed, petting a dog, cleaning a gravestone. Think of the best images to convey your idea of that abstraction, so every reader can be on the same page with you. Don't pigeonhole yourself into a form that will stifle your creativity. Utilize imagery and sound, have a meaning and a purpose for every poem, and revise until your fingers bleed. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you have found this video interesting. Please kindly subscribe to this platform if you haven't done so. And don't forget to share this content on all social media platforms. See you in the next episode.